So here to talk through the global automotive outlook, market drivers and key disruptions, who's brought along his crystal ball, I'd like to welcome Joe McCabe, President and CEO of Auto Forecast Solutions, to the stage. With Joe, you're going to be in fantastic hands. More than 25 years of predicting the future, a dedicated automotive forecaster. Joe, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to Automotive Logistics. I want to applaud you for the speakers, the first ones, and the panel. Really good content. I'm hoping this dovetails into the conversation. Richard politely told me that my slides are dense, which means a lot on them. But that's by design. They are a takeaway. They're actually up on the app now. I want you to see our data, use it, question it, call us. So be prepared for a lot of things to look at. So a little background on who we are and what we do. At Auto Forecast Solutions, we forecast the production of every vehicle built worldwide for 8 years and now extending that out to 14 years. We do at the powertrain level, engines, transmissions, electric motors. We also look at the, obviously, electrification, ICs only, everything in between. This data is updated every 30 days for our customers. So what it does, it gives them visibility of what they're going after now, what they're supplying, or whether they're working on this in the supply chain, and then what's replacing that business. On top of that, we built a series of business intelligence solutions that lets you take the data one step further. Part number analysis, market share analysis, even making your own scenarios using us as the seed and making different issues if you want to change the market conditions. But most importantly, I've been doing this for 25 years. All my team leads have been doing it for 25 years. Our support is included. You shouldn't just get a bunch of numbers and say, okay, these numbers don't gel with the customer's saying, but I just got to live with them. You should be able to question them. You should be able to ask us the so what behind it. You know, if we look at the automotive industry today and we took everyone's plans together, unfortunately, it'd be 40% larger than reality. And our job is to sort of help people navigate their planning. What's great about the first two speakers is a lot of the underlying theory and theme was this proactive approach. This business usual approach has to be looked at differently. We have to adapt and we have to motivate ourselves differently. That's been the whole message this morning. I'm going to give you that similar message going forward. So we have been doing a weekly analysis of the semiconductor industry. So we take all the announcements of the chip shortage. We can then put that in our algorithm to the vehicle level, calculate the number of vehicles that have been impacted, and then take it one step further. Do we believe those vehicles are recoverable volume or unrecoverable volume? Simply put, a lot of manufacturers, when they do get their chips, they're not going to put it in their unprofitable vehicles for North America, passenger cars. They're going to put in their profitable vehicles, large SUVs and large pickup trucks. So we have to look at every vehicle and how it is right now and how that manufacturer is going to strategically make that vehicle in the future. And you're going to see multiple pieces of information on here, but the takeaway here is that since we started tracking this first week in January of 21, nearly 14 million units have been impacted based on the chip shortage. That's based on their plans. That translates to nearly 8 million units of lost volume, unrecoverable volume that we saw since this thing started. Now, we're a forecasting company. We're not out of the woods, so then we look at every vehicle and say, well, which ones are still potentially going to get hit? That puts us near 14.7 million units. This year alone, we're looking at nearly 1.5 million units of lost production. So it's really difficult for suppliers and everyone in the supply chain to really plan against all this huge volatility in the industry. So you see on the left-hand side is basically what's going on right now by region this year, and on the right-hand side, since we tracked. And unfortunately, North America and Europe are fighting for first place in a very unfortunate race. So let's look at the global outlook. We're going to anchor the data to high water marks and our forecast. And I circled out the high water marks. So there's 6 regions we cover. There's currently 60 countries in the world that are building light vehicles right now. And we go out through 2029 for all of our slides today. So if we look at, first of all, North America, the high water mark was 17.79 million units back in 16. And if you extrapolate that all the way out, you'll see that we stay in the low 16, low 17 market. That is not a bad thing. This is how the new market conditions are going to change. You're going to see less volume, more build where you sell, better strategy of lower inventory, getting more profitability per vehicle. That's great for the vehicle manufacturers. That's not so great for the supply chain that's based a lot on volume and moving things from point A to point B in large volumes. In terms of Europe, their high water mark was 22.38 million units in 17. If we look at China, 27.72. and we look at the rest of Asia taking China out, we're looking at 2018. So there's this cluster that we had that when we use part of our analysis, we have to look at history to help us understand one of the factors into the forecast going forward. We wanted to use this as an anchor because they're going to be an important part of the story going today. This data was updated as of September 1st. Like I said, we update it every 30 days. If we look at the major markets, breaking North America, Europe, and China into their 3 areas, let's look at a short term. So the green is basically actuals in a pre-pandemic level. The yellow is actuals in now, pandemic, and current. And the blue is the forecast. And we're looking at a quarterly basis. The takeaway here is that with the shortages going on and with manufacturers looking more build-to-order strategies, the seasonality effects of production are changing. They're flattening out. We're going to see volume in the quarters coming out, not having these big peaks and valleys during the year. So we got to pay attention to that volume and how it's really going to play out. And we saw that in North America, China, and Europe across the board. Look, we do our forecast from the bottom up. We don't pick a top line and just fill a bucket and say, hey, we hit 17 million. So the numbers come out to the sum of the results. It's important when you look at a forecasting. It's just not economic drivers and looking at GDP and everything like that. It's got to be into the meat of how that vehicle exists in the market, how it competes within that vehicle manufacturer's own portfolio, and how it competes on a global stage. When we talk about being proactive and going forward, it's not just the usual suspects of customers you need to pay attention to. You got to pay attention to the new players that want to enter a market. So this is our 1 million unit club slide. And when we look at a brand owner owns the brand. So Volkswagen owns, Volkswagen and Porsche and Seat. Doesn't matter who makes it, whether it's a contract manufacturer or it's a partnership in China, we want to break them, we want to put them in the same bucket because they own the brand and therefore have a lot of commonality in the parts and the vehicles that they're making. And the usual suspects bubble to the surface: Toyota, Volkswagen, Stellantis, 9, 10, 11 million units of production on any given year. But what I want to pay attention to is the bottom of the list. Chery, SAIC, Suzuki, Mazda, GM Wuling, Tata, BYD. When you can build 1 million vehicles and you own that brand, you have buying power. And now that buying power translates into moving to other regions of the world. And all these manufacturers, except for Tesla, are all Chinese-based manufacturers, or at least Asian-based manufacturers, all looking for the North America prize. And when we talk to suppliers, whether they're tiered suppliers or the logistics side or whatever it might be, we say you got to pay attention to who wants to get into this market. Because to get into a market, you need a trusted source that knows how to get it done. They're not going to want to come in blindly. They're going to want a handheld experience to get their vehicles here. So you got to pay attention to these new players because they're really coming full force into the North America space, or at least outside of their current home base, to build a vehicle. So if you're not already working with these suppliers now, these manufacturers right now, I would really pay attention to them because they're going to be a dominant force in the last 5, 10, 15 years. We break North America into 3 major jurisdictions: US, Canada, and Mexico. They all have a little bit of a different story here. Again, high water mark in 16 as our anchor. Low recently, obviously in 2020 with 13 million, starting to come out. But even by 2024, we're not at 16, just about 16 and a quarter. We're not back to a full 17 million unit healthy market. And again, we look at 17.15 as the target here. So trying to think we're going to get back to this 18 million market, it just doesn't make any sense for North America. The build-to-order strategy is really important. You're going to see a real shift in import and export models, especially with the idea of the Inflation Reduction Act and other things that are really pushing on a nationalistic approach for more build where you sell here and supply that source here. We're going to talk a lot about that as we go forward, but it's really important to understand what that production landscape looks like. And yes, if you use 2020 as a bottom and growth path by 29, yes, North America grows by 32%. But if you look at its high water mark in 16, it actually has a negative compounded annualized growth rate. Again, not a problem with that. But the US and Mexico are usually on the high side of that story. And unfortunately, Canada's always been on the low side of the story. A lot of reliance in Canada of Detroit 3. Obviously, Toyota and Honda are very loyal to the jurisdictions they're in. A manufacturer will leave and they'll say, yes, but we'll give you 1/10 the volume back, and Canada will be happy with it. So Canada's finally changing their tune. They're saying, look, there's an electrification space that we can be a major contributor on. We have the minerals, we have the technology. You know, it's a region that is 1/10 the size of the United States in terms of population, with 90% of them all in Ontario and 99% of automotive in Ontario. So that nice centralized base in Canada, the ability that they can be more of a speedboat rather than us big cruise ships trying to navigate these waters and can pivot fast. I really got to pay attention to these new jurisdictions that fall within either a USMCA or a free trade area that are saying we're going to change the dynamic of what we're going to be in the next several years. We're going to play more in the electrification space, and we're going to let the manufacturers and part players come to us because we're going to have what they need. So they've really changed how they looked at things, and that's only been a very short amount of time. We're going to look at every jurisdiction in our company, and we say which other jurisdictions are making that critical decision to say we can play differently in the future space. Mexico is a needed market. It's never going away. Great market to play. They're building a middle class. When you have a manufacturer, an assembly worker that can actually build buy the product they're building, that's a big deal for a jurisdiction. And obviously the United States where we are with this. Now, let's look at it from a mix perspective. This is the powertrain mix. So let's take the noise of where it is and let's look at what's being built. Again, we do a bottom-up forecast. If you sum up all everyone's business plans, no self-respecting vehicle manufacturer will tell you less than 150,000 EVs a year, right? Because they want their supply chain. You throw in the disruption of COVID and semiconductor, and there's an overcorrect, right? We're all getting numbers of 20% higher than reality. They give that to the tier one. The tier one gives another 20% to the tier two, and that ball rolls downhill. What was 100,000 units here at the VM is 175,000 at the lower tiers, because no one wants anyone to be part of the weakest link of their chain, nor anyone below them. And that's very difficult to plan against. So we don't just sum up the business plans, we look at the vehicles being built. 2021, 14% of all vehicles built in North America were electrified. Now, we break them up by the plug-in hybrids and standard hybrids and all that, but let's just big look here. IC, internal combustion engine vehicles, hybrids, and then pure battery electric vehicles, the BEVs. Now, if we move forward, 52% of all vehicles built in North America in 2029 were forecast to be fully electrified. And again, if you talk to all the business plans out there, that's on the conservative side. But this electrification thing is here, and it's here to stay. Do we believe we're going to have, in the next couple decades, all electric vehicles all over the world? No. But we're moving in a positive direction that's forcing everyone to make the tens of billions of dollars investments in this new infrastructure and find a way to still understand the core side when it's IC related. This is the delicate balance that we're trying to help a lot of suppliers and people in the supply chain navigate through. If we break it up into the major jurisdictions now from a powertrain perspective, the United States is the obvious market leader, and a lot of that market leadership right now is the big push from government to get this thing done. If you had to really look at electrification, stand back what it means. Electrification is not a consumer-driven initiative. It's a governmental and environmental-driven initiative. So without their support and the carrots and the sticks, the incentivizing and the punishing, and throwing money at it, it will not exist. So the idea that we have a government that is full force in this direction is going to force this thing to be a too big to fail proposition. At the end of the day, though, if you're not paying attention to how things are moving, you either got to move forward or get out of the way. Canada, like I said, strategically, look at that massive amount. They don't get into BEVs until 24, and then all of a sudden they're taking off and recalibrating a lot of their plants. A lot of electrification. And again, Mexico is really important. 44 or so free trade relationships, centralized market, really a really important part, adds the low cost part of the conversation, but with USMCA and bringing up average cost of wages, that's a good thing. So this idea of looking at Mexico, and there's always been are they still going to be part of the conversation or not? Yes, and they're going to be on that conversation for a very long time. Now, new players. We all know the usual suspects, right? But this is the short list of new players that we believe are coming into the industry. So, and they all have sort of a different strategy. GAC a few years ago, a Chinese-based company, before the pandemic, owned the entire center of the Detroit Auto Show. right? Years before, they were on the concourse. They let all the new players on the concourse. They bought the entire center stack, and then COVID hit. They had a huge partnership with Stellantis that is rocky, let's call it at best. It's not completely severed, but it's having some issues. But they're leveraging that big three, let's call it, relationship. They were even, and they may be changing their strategy on this because of the Stellantis relationship, we're planning to rebadge a GAC vehicle built in China, import into Mexico, and sell it as a Dodge. When we see things like that, that means they're testing the water on the quality of their vehicles. When China comes to North America, it's not if or when, right? It's not if, but it's when. It's going to be a high-value electric vehicle. So they're going to come with it. It's not going to have any internal combustion engine, and they're going to come full force, and they're going to use everything they've learned over the last several decades of their partnerships that they forced into China to then take that North America and European design and quality and move it over. Chery was looking at more of an importer strategy. They worked with an importer called Ha that has since fallen through, but they're not going to get away. They were trying to make their own brands called the Tego and the Vantis. Again, this is a logistical issue, right? Getting these things from point A to point B, setting up these import strategies. Usually you sell 50,000 units somewhere, and once you get to that 50,000 per year, you start building there because it makes more sense from a cost structure. BYD, 2 words, Warren Buffett. Right? It could be his swan song of saying, look, I back BYD. I think they're going to be a good fit here in North America. His backing alone would really push them, and there's a lot of activity what they're looking for in terms of supporting Toyota BZ series with electrification, electric buses in California. They're coming. Geely and ownership strategy, right? Volvo and Lotus, Daimler building their own Lincoln Co. and Polestar brands. You know, keeping arm's length and letting these well-known brands do what they need to do, but learning as they go. SAIC is everywhere but North America. They're surrounding it, Monster. And VinFast, here's a great example. A vehicle manufacturer has never built an electric vehicle, ever. Has a very charismatic, very rich leadership saying, I'm going to bring electrification to North Carolina. Here's $4 billion. And all of a sudden, this acceptance of this new brand comes out. 20 years ago, everyone would say, no, we're going to stick with what we know. But the new buyer out there changes the dynamic. It's an emotional buyer. They're a socially motivated buyer. And they're looking at what they like, not necessarily if they don't bleed Chevy, BMW, or Ford blood through and through. So it's changing that dynamic. You got enough money and you got a cool idea, all of a sudden you can now plant your flag in a jurisdiction. You take out the engine, the transmission, EPA needs, all that pain, all of a sudden you're building a vehicle. So they're not the first, they're not the last to do this, but we need to pay attention to all the new players that want to make their claim here. And then Arrival, Zoox, Rivian, Foxconn, all having their own strategy. You know, if you look at Foxconn, I mean, you know, you could put 2 and 2 together. Major supplier to Apple, they're going to be building the Fisker pear, 2 pieces of fruit. You tell me who's going to be able to build the next Apple vehicle. So, you know, we don't have any proof on that one, but you can sort of, you know, draw the dotted lines on who they'd probably pick as potentially builders of their vehicles. Okay, China, doesn't matter if you're focused on here, you got to pay attention to the China conversation. But there's a lot of little stories here. The first story is a lesson in disruption. In 2010, China was the size of North America, 16.78 million units. At that point, the government said, we want global domination and we want to be energy independent. How are we going to get there? We're going to do full force electrification. We're going to subsidize our builders to get into the EV space. All of a sudden, 2017, 10 million units larger than North America. Now those that are thus work in automotive know it's a glacial speed market. 7 years is 2 life cycles of vehicles. Suppliers are bidding on stuff today that won't be built for 3 years, and that vehicle's going to be around for 5 years. So they're looking at stuff now for a vehicle that's going to be around 8 years from today. So when you talk about growing 10 million units per year in 7 short years, this is unheard of growth. In 18 and 19, they take the subsidies away, immediate drop. All of a sudden, COVID comes, but they're still strong. They weather the pain. 22, they're on a growth path. Now, we're going to be looking at 30 million in 2029. That's only because they're going to be building elsewhere. They're not going to constantly build in China. They're going to build elsewhere. They're still going to have a massive, massive market. And what China's going to do is China's not going to let any failures get in the way. They can't risk major drops. Their government's willing to subsidize. They want to make their own electricity. They're tired of buying everyone else's oil and shipping it in. It's a big deal for them how they're changing their market and they're shifting it. The other takeaway is on the right-hand side, this idea where if we talk about that brand owner slide before, 106 brand owners in 2029 in China, 106 Volkswagens. So these are unsustainable markets. What's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of attrition and consolidation. The government's going to say, look, we're not going to give you money if you make 25,000 a year, but we'll do it for 50. And the 25s will get a call and say, hey, let's partner. Now they're 50. And the 50s will become hundreds, and the hundreds will become 200s, and so on. So the volume's going to be stable, but it's going to be less and less players going on. So paying attention to decision makers, if there's stuff going in and out of that market, who's making it, and who's now the owner of those brands and things like that, we do think there's got to be consolidation in that number. It's just way too big coming out right now. Electrification. So this is what keeps people up at night in automotive. The shotgun blast of stories in electrification. And how do you plan? So let me walk you through this. The dark blue and light blue is the AFS forecast. Dark blue is the legacy players, the Fords and the GMs and all that building electric vehicles. Pure BEVs. The light blue are the startups, the Teslas, the Rivians, the Neos, etc. The greens are their business plans additions. So if you look at the capacity that is being told to the supplier community and logistics players and everything moving in this supply chain, it is double of what we believe is reality. Really difficult. Now you layer on the futurists and everyone believing that flying cars are 12 years away, and that's the gray. Okay? So now we have a market scale of us saying 25 million, which is really a lot of BEVs. Announced plans of pushing 40 million. The optimists pushing 50 million. All right? So we say, okay, how do we plan against this? But then on top of that, if we're going to be building 100 million units in 2029 across a year, which is basically what we do in a given year, even with the optimists, half those vehicles need an internal combustion engine. All right? The other half. Now, they could be hybrids, but they're not pure BEVs. So this idea of this massive investment in electrification is necessary. But walking away from other technologies because we're moving this direction is a little more dangerous in how you look at things. So you have to look at all of the plan, and you can't just bring in whatever's, being what you search on Google and say, hey, that's what they said they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. Not everyone can win, right? But again, vehicle manufacturers can't tell their supply chain a low number because they have to get them to make the tooling to make the parts. And no vehicles, there's not a lot of electric vehicles that exist today. So there could be other winners out there, right? So that planning side is really how we help our customers navigate the pain points of, hey, my RFQ says this, you're 25% less of this, why? Let's look at batteries a little bit. So the average, one of the big issues is range anxiety. Most vehicles coming out, even their lower battery capacity vehicles, are around 230, 250 miles per charge, which is fantastic. Some reaching, upward in 500. So their average is about 300 miles per charge on a vehicle for North America and Europe, lower across the Asian markets. Right now, we are forecasting, again, with our view of the market, nearly 1,600 gigawatts of capacity of batteries will be needed. That's a lot. That's 4 times what's needed today. It also translates to 30 to 50 more gigafactories. Tens and hundreds of billions of dollars need to be thrown at this issue. This also changed the dynamic of where we're going to see production. A lot of times you're going to see a manufacturer as the core, and all the suppliers, whether they're just in time or whatever it is, build their concentric circles around that plant. We see a future that the core is going to be where the minerals are, where the battery plants are, where the infrastructure is, and then they're going to build from there. So you're going to see cars being built in states you've never seen before because they're going to incentivize, or they're going to have some sort of brine capability to pull lithium out or things of that nature. So this dynamic of the location of things is also going to change. If you look at chemistries, there's not one chemistry to pick from. When there's more than one thing to pick from, it is the definition of disruption because you don't know who's going to win. NMC 811, NMC 955 batteries are designed for long-range premium applications. The new LFP batteries are now coming in because it eliminates the need for nickel and cobalt. The more you can eliminate a critical mineral and material out of the battery, the better you're suited. It checks all the boxes. They don't want to see kids in the Congo pulling cobalt out of the ground anymore, right? This has a global problem that we're paying attention to. So the more you can reduce the need for critical minerals, it checks a lot of the boxes. However, LFP is really designed for those lower end vehicles that don't have a lot of range, which is fine though. Solid state is coming. It's just way out there, right? 2028, 2029 in volume. So again, we haven't even figured out what chemistries we're going to use to move these vehicles, let alone who's going to be the winner at the end of the day. In terms of raw materials, global production in 2021 was 100,000 metric tons across all industries, with the biggest growth coming into the automotive space. We're forecasting the need for about 2.6 times more lithium production. Again, our forecast, you're going to hear me beat that dead horse about our forecast, but this is not what the manufacturer need. They need about 5 times more if you put all the plans together. So paying attention to those jurisdictions, I heard in their earlier conversations, like looking at those free trade areas that may have access to the minerals that they can be applied to future vehicles, that's a big deal. You know, we're all going to be scrambling for these minerals and the materials moving forward, and the numbers are almost obnoxiously large that's going to have to be sustained. Okay, so this is definitely an eye chart, but it's the takeaway is here. Is this the Inflation Reduction Act? And these are just the highlights. Number one, vehicles got to be built in North America, hands down. That doesn't mean you're going to make any money on that vehicle or any kind of tax incentive yet. It's got to be built here. Number two, adjusted gross income. It's got to be within a person's, you know, depending on if they're filing jointly or filing by themselves. Great. There are price limitations. Trucks and SUVs have to be under $80,000. Passenger cars under $55,000. So expect a lot of $79,995 trucks and a lot of, you know, $54,995 cars coming your way. The critical minerals are ranging, and the critical battery components are ranging from 40 to 100% and 40 to 80% and so on. Another big takeaway, foreign entities of concern are going to be completely eliminated. So if you look at it, I think the minerals are by 23 and the batteries by 24. It might be flopped there, it's in the text. But you could hit your 40% critical mineral and a 50% battery, but a 1% of that stuff comes from China, game off, right? So this elimination of foreign entities of concern is a language that no one's really talking about. Like it's mentioned, but since a lot of it comes from China right now, this to me is one of the largest hurdles, because we're not playing a big game of Sim City. We're not going to say, hey, there's a mineral plant, there's a battery plant. They take a very long time to get set up and get them fully established and running at full capacity. So that one's going to be tough because a lot of vehicles are going to drop off the list next year. Now, we're already hearing about Hyundai saying, look, we're coming, right? We have all these EVs. You can't punish us. So if you at least give us a little reprieve and say, if we make the investment here and we're here by 24, can we at least get a sort of a credit? And the government's sort of weighing their options. Okay, and if you're coming here and you're going to make the investment, maybe we'll put you on the short list of you're allowed through the back door. These are the brands that may or may not be viable for the tax credit, okay? So again, on the last slide, half the credit is mineral and half the credit is battery. All we can do right this second is identify 2 criteria. If it's domestically built and if at least one trim of that vehicle is within the IRA MSRP threshold. We cannot yet talk about the mineral and batteries yet. Now, you're going to hear a lot about that because whoever cracks is going to say, hey, we have our incentive over here. So I'm only doing on 2 criteria. And yes, there's a lot of vehicles in 2023 that can be part of the IRA tax credit. Not guaranteeing them, but at least they're part of it. But if you keep going out, you know, Lincoln doesn't hit till 2024. Acura doesn't hit till 24. Chrysler and Dodge till 24. Hyundai doesn't hit till 25 unless they get the reprieve that the government they're asking the government for. BMW till 26. There are certain brands that just won't exist to be part of this IRA tax incentive yet. So this is a very long strategy the government's playing with this this idea of giving a tax incentive, but it is driving the manufacturer to say, we have to eventually all be here. So what that does from a logistics standpoint is the balance of imports and exports is going to completely shift. You're going to see a lot less imports, right? There's not going to, if you have a vehicle that is in the price point, why are you going to ship it over from Europe to be here? You're going to plant a flag and you're going to build it here. And that's really going to change how things are moved back and forth. You got to pay attention to when someone's going to start building here and how it's going to change your business. So logistically, like I said, accelerating domestic production It's going to reduce not only the vehicle, but potentially component imports, because we have other things such as certain content rules that USMCA has. And it's going to open up new jurisdictions to service EV infrastructure, right? So you got to really pay attention to your business now and how you're strategizing for the next 5, 10, 15 years going forward, and who potentially could be customers who might drop off. Global electrification. So there's no internal combustion engine packages only on here. These are only vehicles that are moving through some sort of hybridization. They're broken up into Chevs, standard hybrids, PHEVs, plug-in hybrids, BEVs, and the percentage of penetration of the battery electric vehicles inside that market. 2029, yes, we have nearly one out of 4 vehicles built worldwide, full battery electric vehicles. That is an unbelievable amount of volume, and that's a big move. However, on the right side, that puts 149 million battery electric vehicles on the road that have very limited infrastructure. So now we got to get these things to be moving more than one charge, and there's a big hurdle in terms of the consumer sentiment about getting these things, because we're already hearing about charging networks that 1/3 of them don't even work. So again, here's where government needs to come in and invest and invest and invest. Ford's got an interesting strategy, right? I'm going to call them out now only because it's a recent news. They said, we know our dealership network's going to change. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, dealer, you can invest anywhere from $900 to $1.2 million. You're going to be a charging station. They did the math. They said 90%, I don't know the exact numbers, but 90% of all people in the United States live within 5 or 10 miles from a Ford dealership. So if we can reduce inventory, and by the way, that's all going away, right? This idea of 90 days of trucks on a lot doesn't make sense anymore. 60 days of cars doesn't make sense. You're going to go in, you're going to order your product, you're going to pay sticker, you're going to get it in a week or two. COVID was sort of a blessing for the vehicle manufacturers. It taught us to wait. And if you want exactly what you want, you're going to wait a little bit. So Ford says, look, you're going to now be the dealership, you're going to be the charging network. You'll have a dealership network. There's other revenue streams. You'll have a captive audience. They'll come and they'll charge. There'll be arcades for your kids and bounce houses and coffees and whatever you want. But they're getting creative on how they're really going to change their market going forward, because they know they can't kill the dealership network. They have to basically be more strategic on how they're going to use it. And when we hear news like that, we like just the creativity behind it, but it's definitely changing. In North America, everyone thinks North America's behind. 1 out of every 3 vehicles built in North America in 2029 will be full battery electric. Right? 2024, BEVs will overtake full hybrids. A lot of it is the stick, right? Not the carrot. The do-it-or-else mentality that we have to get it all done. Yes, there's carrots out there for tax incentives, and there's money being thrown at people to make the infrastructure investment, but a lot of it is sort of a do-it-or-else. 28.3 million battery electric vehicles on the road that all need an infrastructure. Right? Going from today, which is, I don't know, 2 million. That's a 3-fold increase of infrastructure that needs to work. Europe, ahead of the game because they were invested earlier into this push. So let's call 38% of all vehicles built in Europe full battery electric. As you can see from some of these charts, very few are plug-in hybrids. If you're going to make the investment of plug-in hybrid, you might as well just make the investment of BEVs. So either stay in ICs, go standard hybrids, or jump to BEVs, because you still need a significant enough battery to get these things moving. You might as well make the leap. 41 million vehicles on the road in Europe. China, it's going to crest, but the law of large numbers says a big number in a big market is a big number, right? So 31% of China is going to be full battery electric vehicles in 2029. 9.5 million battery electric vehicles that they want to build in China. It's nearly 70 million vehicles. I recommend, if you're not doing it now, invest in orange extension cords, because you're going to all be flying right out of the high rise to plug all these things in. So that's take that as you want. I'd make the run to Home Depot and start buying them up. Ford, as a brand owner, they are heavily invested. They're pushing, right? Very few plug-in hybrids. 35% of all vehicles are going to be built globally full battery electric. GM, a little different because they really have a European footprint anymore, sold off all those assets, right? So even though it looks like they may be behind in Ford from a penetration rate of their products, it's solid because it's like this is a North America and a China story. Stellantis, when they were FCA, they were buying credits from Tesla, which made Elon a trillionaire. Now they partner with PSA. Now they're all of a sudden a leader in electrification. So this idea of organic growth here is not the answer. This idea of partnerships and moving forward with it are going to be really important. Stellantis is a really important part of that. But they have a really big plug-in hybrid mix as well, because all the markets they are across Europe and things of that nature. So 31%, 12.5 million units that they have to have charged. Volkswagen, just an example of a European manufacturer, similar growth path, 30% of all vehicles they build, 29 fully electrified. I'm using 18 as an anchor here because the number back there doesn't make any sense, further back. Hyundai, really pushing hard. Great product. You know, when you talk about a Korean manufacturer and you talk the ability to how they can leverage an LG or a Samsung relationship and really be a leader in batteries and minerals and the whole supply chain, that is a huge, huge advantage they have coming into the game. Now, Honda flips the script. Toyota is a very similar one. Asian-based manufacturers, specifically Japanese-based manufacturers, have been very big about, we're going to take our time. We're going to hedge our bets. We're going to stay in our lane, what we know. We're looking at fuel cells in 20 years, right? So when we look at other manufacturers, not everyone's going to play by the same playbook, right? You're going to see their hybrids are bigger than their battery electric vehicles in terms of their total portfolio in 2029. They're in it because they have to be in it. China says if you want to play in China, you need a new energy vehicle. It can't be a hybrid. It's got to be plug-in or better. They go, great, now we got to do it. Toyota, the same thing. Toyota said years ago, we are not going to get electrification. We think it's these little, they're good for little communities doing, you know, 25 miles an hour. Their hands being forced to get into the business, right? So they're going to be getting into it, just not this gigantic push. And when you look at a company like Honda and Japan that say they want to be here for 50, 100, 500 years, and their strategic way of thinking, you know, you got to really pay attention to why they're not doing the same thing everyone else is. Toyota could have rode that Prius right into the sunset of EV leadership. They're the grandparent of electrification with that Prius, and they didn't, right? Not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. We're going to see in 10 years what happens with that, but they were more methodical. They're more fuel cell based in the future, and that's, if you think about a fuel cell, it's still an electric vehicle, but you go from a battery this big, the energy's in the battery, to a battery this big because your energy is in the hydrogen. So if you can find a way to limit your need to have a battery and still have an electrified vehicle, now you got to convince people it's not a Hindenburg, and you know it's not, but people have optics when they buy a vehicle and they think it's going to blow up on the road, but it's not. But it's going to take a long time, and they're going to be the leaders at the end of the day. In terms of North America, I want to break up the battery electric production by manufacturer. I'm going to break it into two slides. One is those that are building 100,000 BEVs per year in 29, and the next one's going to be under 100,000. And everyone thinks that Tesla's going to be the winner, right? They're still be the winner. They don't have to make 10, 20 million units to be successful. They've proven their success, right? Tesla's proven you don't have to have profitability to be an indicator of success, meaning trillion-dollar company worth 10 times the GM, and it took them a while, it took them 11 years even to make a profit. And they made profit because Chrysler was buying their credits at $2 billion a year because they need the carbon credits, right? It's a great model. It works for them. Everyone says, I'm going to be the next Tesla. I'm going to come in, I'm going to go public. And I'm going to be a new company, I'm going to go public, and on day one, I'm going to be $100 billion. No cars to show. Now, we've seen that happen the last few times, and their valuation has significantly dropped for other companies that have done this. But the fact that Wall Street and investment communities are really inspired by these new players of what they could be and not what they are now changes your customer mix in the future, right? It doesn't say, hey, they build cars for 120 years, I trust them. It says, they never built a car, but that AutoCAD drawing's pretty nice. And you throw a battery and a couple motors on it, hey, it's pretty sweet, we're going to sell this thing. And I know I'm being, tongue-in-cheek here, but the reality of letting these new players come in is a reality. You just got to pay attention to the mix. Now, a couple takeaways here. GM and Ford are going to be higher than Tesla in North America. Honda's the big one here. 2025 is when they enter BEV production in North America. One life cycle, they're fourth place. All right? I mean, look at the size of them. That's how fast this is moving. They're getting their suppliers, everything in line for one life cycle to be a leader in North America. That's a big statement to make, and when we look at the data just falls out that way. That's how, when they're taking Odyssey and fully electrifying Odyssey, they're taking vehicles that are known and fully electrifying them for this market. Right? Then you have the Rivians of the world, you have the Geelys, the Volkswagens, all playing an important part. Okay, in 2022, the ones in green are those that had zero or near zero BEVs in their portfolio. And then all of a sudden in 29, BMW goes from 0 to 41% of their BEV portfolio in North America is battery electric. Hyundai goes from 0 to 24%. Geely goes from 0 to 100. All electric vehicles. All the Volvo brand, all Polestars, everything here, fully electric, right? Stellantis, 0.1 to 24%. This is 2 life cycles, 22 to 29, depending on how you want to look at a manufacturer. Massive growth and money being thrown at this thing. On the other side of the coin, the ones that are making under 100,000 a year, Foxconn, Lucid, VinFast, Toyota, Canoo, Via. Some companies you may have heard of, some companies you may have never heard of, right? Via was actually the first electric truck company years ago. They would take Silverados and take out the powertrain and throw electrified in, and they would try to sell a $80,000 pickup truck when gas was $2 a gallon. It was just the wrong time, obviously. Now gas at $5 a gallon, okay, we'll see. But they're rethinking their business strategy. But again, these are all viable players. They're not flash-in-the-pan companies. You may have never worked with them, but they're going to make a statement. They're going to give it to some social, TikToker to drive their car around. All of a sudden, people are going to say, I want one of those. And again, tongue-in-cheek, but this is the new type of buyer we're dealing with. Let's talk about volatility. In 2019, the last year of pre-pandemic and full actuals, we update the actuals every month, but this is the pre-pandemic. Tesla was #1 battery electric vehicle manufacturer globally at 365,000 units. Fast forward to 29, Tesla's #2. But now leaders are 3 million, 2.7, 2.5, 1.7. Massive volume. The other takeaway here is the ones with stars. They weren't even on the list in 2019. So in 10 years, this leadership list changes almost on a monthly basis based on someone's new plans to do something with their vehicles. Again, backing which horse is going to be a really interesting task going forward. And even if that horse is in your stable, how are you going to get them to work with them? However, rising tide raises all boats. 71% of all production of battery electric vehicles in 2019 were with the top 10. It just so happened, and I love how it came out this way, by 70%, almost same number, came out in 2029. So there's still a lot of others. There's 7.5 million units of other players out there building battery electric vehicles. And again, when a manufacturer wants to build something, they're going to need their hand held. And that hand holding is not just the supply base, but moving their product from A to consumer, where logistics becomes a huge part of the equation. This is also the keep up night. By 2040, our long term, we can forecast 55% of the whole world is going to be battery electric vehicles. We know others are way higher than that. We get it, that they can be there. If you look at the vehicle manufacturers and their business plans, it's 92%. Big gap, right? And again, as we talked, there's the General Motors, Ford, Volkswagen all-in push. Right now, they're going to really use commercial vehicles as a potential winner to get those things on the road, Amazon trucks and Mercedes partnering with Rivian and things like that to really push hard and get the optics up. And then you have the Toyotas, the Mazdas, and Hondas are more methodical in their approach and sitting back and saying we're going to play in all the space until we really pick a direction, but we're going to excel in all of them. So this is why there's a massive amount of volatility in the story. In terms of BEV sales in the United States, yes, it's going up, right? We're coming off of 5.5% of all vehicles sold in the United States this year is targeted to be battery electric vehicles, 35% by 29. But the mix is going to have to change. You can't sell $113,000 crab walking Hummers. You got to sell entry-level vehicles that will basically most consumers will be able to afford. So we go from this luxury push to this entry-level push that's coming in. When I say entry, I'm still talking a $50,000 electric vehicle, right? It's a lot of money for a vehicle. But that's the only way they're going to make some profitability at bringing in these, let's call them lower-end battery electric vehicles. Last two slides. Total global platforms. So again, the underpinnings of a vehicle. So same frame, same body in white, same whatever. They just change it for branding and styling and maybe different ways of cutting the product for different markets. Volkswagen at the highest MQB, 7 million units. Toyota at the highest, 4 million units. It's 25 million units being on the top 10 platforms in 19, represented across 36 different countries of production. Manufacturers have always been where if we can commonize the production footprint and how we get things done, then we can save some money on the design and manufacturing and so on. Fast forward to 2029. Again, usual suspects bubble to the surface, but only 2 platforms in the top 10 are full electric, excuse me, full battery electric. And most of them have electrification, but not many of them have a lot of full battery electric vehicles. So again, there is still a significant amount of volume, even planned for 29, that is not in the BEV space. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-electrification. We like to be just pro-reality. And you got to look at your product portfolio. You got to look at what you're moving around. And you can't just say, well, they said they're going all EV, so we're going to change our strategy. You got to really look at how the market is consuming it, and that's where we come in. So when we looked at this data, we said, look, there's still millions and millions of volume that's not battery electric vehicle in that future. So my final thoughts. The consumer has changed. Brand loyalty has eroded. This idea of bleeding it because, you know, my grandpappy drove a Chevy and I'm going to do it too, that market is slowly dissolving. It's unfortunate. But people are buying things without touching them, right? They like it, what it looks like. They hear it does cool things. You know, it makes blue lights, or it's got a little, you know, you can push a thing and the passenger, it makes a fart sound in Teslas. I mean, little stuff like this. If people are really buying into, hey, I want that in my car. So that's changing how entry of new players is coming in. Number 2, the build-to-order strategy is really going to take off. Get ready for no need to move 90 days of trucks to a lot. It's going to be just a couple, and it's going to be build-to-order. They're going to sell less vehicles for higher profit, which is no good for volume-based players in this market. Subscription is going to be the answer. They're going to say, if I can get everyone's wallet, the Netflix effect, for $9 a month on something, blue lights, a new scent comes out of your vents, you now have 5 more miles of range, whatever it might be, they're going to ding the consumer that way. And I think we've all fallen that trap of cutting the cable line but having double the amount of money invested into streaming services. It's a reality that the manufacturers are going to capitalize on. Less vehicles, which means less stuff to move, less stuff to make, harder for people to make money if you're in the supply chain. The China effect, not if, but when. And because the IRA is here, it's going to push them a little faster. Obviously, the geopolitical issues are getting in the way, but China's coming. Supply chain, this is where the wheelhouse is, right? You got to rethink your just-in-time processes. It's a great model, but it doesn't work right now. You know, when you have Russia attacking the Ukraine and all of a sudden wiring harnesses all coming out of there to go, wait a second, maybe I need 2 tier 1s, and maybe I got to scatter them into non-volatile areas. It's changing how supply chain needs to be done. It's, you know, we're trying to react to what's going on with COVID. Investigating those secondary and tertiary supply chains. The import model is going to change. We really do believe a lot of lines will need to be cut off because they'll be built here instead. And new customers are looking for guidance, and they need your help to get here. Those that have never built an EV, let alone built North America, need to know how the market works. Existing players, you're looking at Mercedes and Rivian getting together, GM building Hondas and vice versa. The new BrightDrop brands. And the new players, this is the reality I've been banging home this whole time, is new players can enter a market with an idea, with a good-looking vehicle, rip out the powertrain, have no environmental problems with it, get a charismatic person on them, either put a nice hat on them, big sunglasses, whatever you want to do. And all of a sudden, people are going to say, I'm going to pay attention to that. And you really got to look at who those winners and losers may be. And I don't mean losers in a bad thing, but there's going to be a lot of people throwing money at every part of this, and you just got to pick the right direction for your organization. So thank you for your time.